Tonight's feature is How to Survive Victorian London. Let's kick off this tale right away. Imagine stepping off a rattling omnibus onto the cobblestones of Victorian London, the year perhaps 1875, and finding yourself suddenly responsible for your own survival in this sprawling metropolis of nearly 4 million souls. The first thing that would strike you, even before the acrid smell of coal smoke and horse manure, would be the sheer overwhelming nature of the city's sounds. The clatter of iron-shod wheels on stone, the calls of street vendors hawking everything from hot pies to matches, the distant whistle of steam engines, and beneath it all, the constant murmur of humanity pressed together in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. Your survival in this great Victorian experiment would depend entirely on understanding that London in this era was not one city, but dozens of cities layered atop each other, each with its own rules, its own dangers, and its own opportunities. The gleaming West End, with its gaslit theaters and fashionable squares, existed in the same geographical space as the fetid rookeries of Seven Dials or the industrial wasteland of the East End. Yet they might as well have been different planets for all the connection they shared. Navigating between these worlds, understanding their boundaries and their customs, would determine whether you thrived or merely survived, or perhaps didn't survive at all. The very air you breathed would be your first challenge, thick as it often was with the yellow fog that Londoners had begun calling pea soupers, a mixture of natural mist and the smoke from thousands upon thousands of coal fires burning in homes, factories, and workshops throughout the city. These fogs could descend without warning, turning familiar streets into alien landscapes where a wrong turn might lead you into the Thames or into neighborhoods where your life would be worth considerably less than the clothes on your back. Learning to navigate by sound and memory during these episodes would be essential, as would carrying a small lantern or at least matches and a candle, though many newcomers to the city learned this lesson only after spending a terrifying night lost in streets they thought they knew. Finding lodging would be your most immediate practical concern, and here the Victorian class system would reveal itself in all its rigid complexity. If you arrived with letters of introduction and sufficient funds, you might secure rooms in a respectable boarding house in Bloomsbury or Marylebone, where the landlady would enforce strict rules about visitors, noise, and moral conduct, but where you would also enjoy the security of knowing your fellow lodgers had been similarly vetted. These establishments often provided not just a bed but a social network, as residents would gather in the common parlor for conversation, cards, or perhaps to share the morning newspapers that few could afford individually. But if your circumstances were more modest, as they were for the vast majority of London's inhabitants, you would find yourself exploring the warren of smaller lodging houses that filled the spaces between the grand thoroughfares. Here, a bed in a shared room might cost you 4p a night, while a room to yourself, if you could find one, might run to a shilling or more. The quality of these accommodations varied enormously, from relatively clean establishments run by widows trying to make an honest living, to the notorious doss houses where criminals, vagrants, and the desperately poor crowded together in conditions that defied both sanitation and human dignity. The key to survival in this housing market was developing an eye for the subtle signs that distinguished a marginally respectable lodging from a genuine danger. A landlady who met prospective tenants at the door, who asked questions about employment and references, who maintained at least the appearance of order in her common areas. These were good signs. Conversely, establishments where you could pay your fourpence to a half-drunk deputy and receive only a number corresponding to a space on the floor, where the smell of unwashed bodies mixed with gin and worse things, where the other residents eyed your possessions with undisguised calculation. These places might offer shelter from the rain, but they offered little else in the way of security. Understanding the geography of safety would be crucial to your daily survival, as London's neighborhoods could change character within the space of a single block. The broad, well-lit commercial streets like Oxford Street or the Strand were generally safe during daylight hours, patrolled as they were by the Metropolitan Police and bustling with respectable commerce. But step into the narrow alleys and courts that branched off these main arteries, and you might find yourself in spaces where the police rarely ventured, where gas lighting was sporadic or non-existent, and where the residents had developed their own systems of law and order that had little to do with the official justice system. The rookeries, those dense warrens of ancient buildings subdivided into the smallest possible living spaces, were particularly treacherous for the uninitiated. Places like the Old Nickel in Bethnal Green, or the courts and alleys around Drury Lane, were virtually self-governing territories where strangers were immediately noticed and evaluated for their potential value as victims. Yet even these areas had their own internal logic, their own hierarchies and codes of conduct. A newcomer who showed proper respect, who didn't display obvious wealth or naivety, who perhaps had business there rather than simple curiosity, might pass through safely enough. Learning to read the visual language of Victorian London streets would be essential for safe navigation. The quality of the paving stones, the presence or absence of gas lamps, the condition of the buildings, the dress and demeanor of the people you encountered, all of these would tell you something about where you were and how you should conduct yourself. In the better neighborhoods, even the working-class districts, you would see evidence of municipal investment, newer sewers, regular street cleaning, police boxes at regular intervals. In the worst areas, refuse might pile up for weeks. The buildings would show signs of chronic neglect, and the very air would carry the smell of poverty and desperation. Your clothing would serve as both protection and communication in this environment, marking your social status as clearly as if you carried a sign. The cut of your coat, the quality of your boots, the presence or absence of gloves, the state of your hat, all of these would be read instantly by everyone you encountered, determining how you would be treated by shopkeepers, policemen, potential employers, and potential predators alike. Dressing slightly below your actual means was often wise, as it reduced your attractiveness as a target for theft, while still maintaining sufficient respectability to function in legitimate society. But clothing was more than just social signaling. It was practical armor against the physical challenges of Victorian urban life. A good thick coat was essential not just for warmth, but for protection against the constant rain and the corrosive effects of the polluted air. Sturdy boots with good soles were crucial for navigating streets that might be ankle-deep in mud, refuse, and worse things, particularly in the poorer districts where street cleaning was sporadic at best. Gloves protected your hands not just from cold, but from the grime that coated every surface in the city, while a hat was essential protection against the soot that rained down constantly from the thousands of chimneys that forested the London skyline. Finding work would be your next great challenge, and here again, the rigid social hierarchies of Victorian society would determine your options. If you possessed education, proper accent, and good references, you might aspire to positions in banks, offices, or shops in the better parts of the city. These positions offered not just better wages but respectability, regular hours, and the possibility of advancement. A clerk in a counting house might earn 25 to 30 shillings a week, enough to afford decent lodging, adequate food, and even some small luxuries. But such positions were fiercely competitive, and many found themselves competing with hundreds of other applicants for each opening. The ability to write in a clear hand, to perform basic mathematics quickly and accurately, to present oneself with proper deference to superiors while maintaining dignity among equals. These skills were essential but not sufficient. Personal connections, letters of introduction, membership in the right church or mutual benefit society, these often mattered more than pure ability. For those without such advantages, London still offered numerous opportunities for survival, though they required different skills and carried different risks. The city's vast appetite for services created countless niches for the enterprising individual. Street selling was one obvious option: flowers, newspapers, matches, small manufactured goods, food items. But success required understanding your customers, your competition, and the complex web of unofficial permissions and protections that governed each patch of territory. The flower sellers around Covent Garden, the newspaper boys at railway stations, the pie sellers outside theaters. Each of these groups had developed their own customs and hierarchies, and newcomers needed to navigate these carefully to avoid conflict. Casual labor offered another route to survival, though it required physical strength and the ability to be at the right place at the right time. The docks provided perhaps the most opportunities for unskilled work, as ships arrived daily requiring men to load and unload their cargoes. But dock work was notoriously uncertain. You might work 3 days one week and none the next, and the competition was fierce among the thousands of men who gathered each morning hopping to be selected by the foreman. Understanding the informal systems that governed these selections, which foremen were fair, which could be influenced by small bribes, which gangs of workers controlled which sections of the docks, could mean the difference between regular income and starvation. The building trades offered steadier work for those with skills or the willingness to learn them. London was expanding constantly during this period, with new neighborhoods pushing ever outward into the surrounding countryside, while the city center was being continuously rebuilt and modernized. Carpenters, bricklayers, plasterers, painters, all were in constant demand, but even unskilled laborers could find work carrying materials, mixing mortar, or clearing sites, though the work was hard and often dangerous, with few safety regulations to protect workers from falls, cave-ins, or toxic materials. For women, the employment landscape was both more limited and more complex. Domestic service offered the most respectable option, though it meant surrendering much of your personal freedom in exchange for security. A position in a wealthy household might provide good meals, adequate lodging, and even the possibility of learning skills that could lead to better positions later. But such positions required references, experience, and often connections that many newcomers lacked. More accessible were positions in the lower levels of domestic service: scullery maids, kitchen helps, nursery maids, where the work was hard and the hours long, but where a young woman could at least be confident of a bed and regular meals. The needle trades employed thousands of women throughout London, from the skilled seamstresses who worked in fashionable dressmaking establishments to the pieceworkers who labored in their own rooms, sewing shirts or stitching boots for wholesale dealers. But this work was seasonal, poorly paid, and physically demanding, with women often working by candlelight until their eyes gave out, their fingers bleeding from constant pricking by needles. The phrase "sweated labor" was coined to describe these conditions, and many women found that even working 18 hours a day, they could barely earn enough to pay for food and lodging. Street selling offered women another option, though it carried greater risks to respectability. Flower sellers, particularly young women, might do well in the theater districts or around fashionable hotels, where gentlemen might purchase posies for their companions. But the boundary between flower selling and prostitution was often thin in the public mind, and women in this trade had to navigate carefully to avoid both actual danger and damage to their reputations. Understanding the city's systems of credit and mutual aid would be crucial for survival during periods of illness or unemployment. The pawn shop was an institution central to working-class life, where anything of value, clothing, tools, household items, even a wedding ring, could be converted to immediate cash in exchange for a pawn ticket and the hope of eventual redemption. The skilled pawnshop customer understood the rhythms of these establishments, pawning items on Monday when cash was short, and redeeming them on Saturday when wages were paid, sometimes repeating this cycle with the same items week after week. Mutual benefit societies and burial clubs were another essential element of working-class survival strategies. For a few pence a week, members could insure themselves against the costs of illness, unemployment, or death, ensuring that they wouldn't end up in the workhouse or a pauper's grave. These societies were often organized around trade, neighborhood, or pub associations, and membership provided not just financial security but social connections that could lead to employment opportunities or help in times of crisis. The pub itself served as much more than just a place for drinking in working-class London life. It was a social center, an informal employment exchange, a place where news and gossip were exchanged, where small business deals were conducted, where mutual aid societies held their meetings. Understanding the social dynamics of your local pub, which customers were to be treated with respect, which could be approached for favors, which were best avoided entirely, was essential for integration into neighborhood life. Food would be a constant concern, both in terms of cost and safety. The cheapest options were often the most dangerous, as unscrupulous vendors mixed sawdust with flour, watered down milk, or sold meat from diseased animals. Learning to identify reliable sources of food, even if they were slightly more expensive, could save you from the stomach ailments that could quickly progress to something far more serious in an era before antibiotics or proper medical care for the poor. Street food offered convenient and relatively inexpensive options, but required careful judgment about vendors and locations. The pie sellers who worked outside factories and workshops, the coffee stalls that opened before dawn to serve early workers, the vendors who sold everything from whelks to watercress from portable stalls. These could provide adequate nutrition at prices the working poor could afford. But the same items sold in different locations might vary enormously in quality and safety. Markets like Billingsgate for fish, Smithfield for meat, and Covent Garden for produce offered the freshest goods at reasonable prices, but only if you knew how to shop them properly. Understanding the rhythms of these markets, when the best selections were available, when prices dropped as vendors tried to clear their remaining stock, which vendors could be trusted for quality and fair dealing, could make your money stretch considerably further. For those with access to cooking facilities, which was far from universal in London's crowded lodging houses, understanding the basics of budget cooking was essential. Cheap cuts of meat could be made palatable and nutritious through long, slow cooking, while vegetables that might look unpromising could provide vital nutrition when properly prepared. The ability to make a filling soup from scraps, to stretch a small piece of meat into several meals, to recognize which foods were still safe despite their appearance. These skills could mean the difference between adequate nutrition and slow starvation. The city's water supply presented another daily challenge that required both caution and local knowledge. While some areas had access to relatively clean water from the new municipal systems, much of London still relied on wells, pumps, and water cellars whose sources might be contaminated with sewage or industrial waste. The famous Broad Street pump incident, where Dr. John Snow identified contaminated water as the source of a cholera outbreak, was just one dramatic example of the daily risks Londoners faced from their water supply. Learning to identify safe water sources, whether public pumps known for their quality, commercial water cellars with good reputations, or establishments like public houses that were known to serve clean water, was literally a matter of life and death. Many residents developed elaborate systems for treating their water, boiling it when fuel permitted, adding alcohol or vinegar to kill harmful organisms, or simply avoiding tap water entirely in favor of tea, coffee, or weak beer. Personal hygiene presented constant challenges in an environment where clean water was expensive, bathing facilities were rare, and the very air deposited layers of grime on everything it touched. Public bathhouses offered one solution, though they were not available in all neighborhoods and required a small fee that might be prohibitive for the very poorest residents. Understanding the schedules and customs of these establishments, which days were reserved for men versus women, which hours offered the cleanest water, what additional services might be available, was important for maintaining the level of cleanliness necessary for respectability and employment. For those without access to public baths, personal cleanliness required creativity and careful resource management. A bowl of water, a piece of soap, and a clean rag could accomplish much if used strategically. Regular washing of hands, face, and neck could maintain a respectable appearance even when a full bath was impossible. Clean undergarments, changed regularly and washed when possible, were essential both for health and for the confidence that came with knowing you were not offensive to others. Dental care was another aspect of health that required personal initiative, as professional dental care was expensive and often more dangerous than the problems it purported to solve. Chewing certain herbs, regular cleaning with salt or soot, avoiding the worst of the sugary treats that were becoming increasingly available. These simple measures could prevent the tooth loss that marked so many of the urban poor and made them immediately identifiable as such. The threat of disease was constant in Victorian London, from the great epidemic diseases like cholera and typhoid that swept through the city periodically, to the chronic conditions like tuberculosis that claimed lives slowly but steadily, to the everyday ailments that could become deadly in the absence of proper treatment. Understanding how diseases spread, recognizing the early symptoms of serious conditions, knowing when to seek help and where to find it, these skills were essential for survival. Cholera was perhaps the most feared of the epidemic diseases, striking suddenly and killing with terrifying speed. Understanding its connection to contaminated water, avoiding areas where cases had been reported, maintaining scrupulous cleanliness in food preparation. These measures could provide some protection, though luck played a large role in survival during major outbreaks. Tuberculosis, known then as consumption, was a slower killer but even more pervasive, particularly in the overcrowded, poorly ventilated lodging houses where many of the working poor lived. Recognizing the early signs, persistent cough, weight loss, night sweats, blood in sputum, and understanding that the disease was contagious meant that you might avoid sharing sleeping quarters with obviously affected individuals, though this knowledge also meant facing the moral complexity of abandoning fellow human beings in their time of greatest need. The various fever diseases, typhoid, typhus, scarlet fever, each had their own patterns and dangers, but all were more likely to strike those who were poorly nourished, living in overcrowded conditions, or already weakened by other hardships. Maintaining the best nutrition possible within your means, seeking the cleanest and most spacious lodging you could afford, avoiding unnecessarily close contact with the obviously ill. These measures provided some protection, though they also required the kind of steady income and social position that allowed such choices. Understanding the medical resources available to the poor was crucial for dealing with serious illness or injury. The great teaching hospitals like Guy's, St. Bartholomew's, and the London Hospital offered free treatment to the poor, though the quality of care was variable and the experience could be dehumanizing. These institutions served as training grounds for medical students, which meant that patients might receive either cutting-edge treatment from enthusiastic young doctors or become subjects for painful experimentation. Dispensaries offered another option for medical care, providing medicines and basic treatment for small fees that were more accessible to working people than private physicians' charges. Understanding which dispensaries had reputations for competent care, which were known for their charity toward the truly desperate, which offered specialized services for particular conditions. This knowledge could be invaluable during health crises. Folk remedies and patent medicines filled the gaps left by formal medical care, though separating the genuinely helpful from the merely profitable required considerable discrimination. Some traditional treatments, willow bark for pain, digitalis for heart conditions, quinine for fever, had genuine medical value, while others were harmless but useless, and still others were actively dangerous. Learning to evaluate these remedies based on the reputation of their sources, their ingredients when known, and their effects on others who had used them was an important survival skill. The legal system presented both protections and dangers that every Londoner needed to understand. The Metropolitan Police, established in 1829, had by the 1870s developed into a relatively professional force that provided genuine security in most areas of the city. Understanding how to interact with police officers, showing proper respect while not appearing either suspicious or helpless, could determine whether an encounter with the law helped or hindered your situation. But the police were not equally present or equally helpful in all parts of London. In the better neighborhoods, a police constable might respond quickly to calls for help and treat respectable citizens with courtesy and efficiency. In the poorest areas, police might be scarce, and their interactions with residents might be marked by suspicion and hostility. Understanding these variations and adjusting your expectations accordingly was important for avoiding disappointment or worse. The court system offered theoretical protection for the rights of all citizens, but accessing that protection required understanding complex procedures and often significant expense. For minor disputes, conflicts with landlords, disagreements over wages, problems with vendors, the police courts offered relatively quick and inexpensive resolution, though the quality of justice depended greatly on the particular magistrate and his attitudes toward different classes of people. For more serious matters, the higher courts offered more thorough proceedings, but at costs that were often prohibitive for working people. Understanding when legal action was worth pursuing, how to gather and present evidence effectively, how to conduct yourself in court to make the best impression on judges and juries. These skills could determine whether you received justice or merely expensive frustration. The workhouse system cast a shadow over the lives of all working-class Londoners, representing the ultimate safety net and ultimate failure simultaneously. Understanding the conditions that might lead to workhouse admission, the procedures involved, the life inside these institutions, and most importantly, the strategies for avoiding such a fate. All of this was crucial knowledge for anyone living close to the margins of poverty. The workhouse was designed to be less attractive than even the worst independent living conditions, on the theory that this would encourage people to find other solutions to their problems. Families were separated. Inmates were required to wear institutional clothing and follow rigid schedules. Work was deliberately unproductive and demoralizing, and contact with the outside world was severely limited. Yet for some, the elderly without family support, the disabled unable to work, children without parents, the workhouse might represent the only alternative to death in the streets. Understanding the early warning signs of approaching destitution, the progression from occasional hunger to chronic malnutrition, from temporary unemployment to complete inability to find work, from occasional illness to chronic incapacity, allowed people to take action while other options remained available. This might mean swallowing pride to ask for help from family or friends, accepting work that was beneath one's usual standards, or making other compromises that preserved independence at the cost of comfort or dignity. The criminal underworld was another reality that all Londoners needed to understand, whether they intended to participate in it or simply to avoid becoming its victims. London's size and complexity created numerous opportunities for illegal gain, from the sophisticated confidence games that targeted wealthy visitors to the simple pickpocketing that plagued crowded streets and public transportation. Understanding how these criminal enterprises operated, who was involved in them, and how to avoid becoming either victim or unwilling participant was essential urban knowledge. The well-dressed gentleman who struck up friendly conversation with visitors near hotels might be planning an elaborate swindle. The children who seem to bump into you accidentally on busy streets might be skilled pickpockets working in coordinated teams. The seemingly helpful strangers who offered directions or assistance might be leading you toward accomplices waiting in quiet alleys. But the criminal world was not simply a matter of predators and victims. For many of London's poorest residents, the boundary between legal and illegal survival strategies was fluid and situational. Selling goods of questionable origin, receiving stolen items in exchange for legitimate services, providing false references or testimony for small fees. These activities occupied a gray area that might represent the difference between survival and starvation for those with few other options. Understanding how to navigate this world without becoming completely corrupted by it required careful judgment about which compromises were acceptable and which would lead to greater dangers. The person who occasionally bought goods that might have been stolen could maintain their essential moral character and legal standing, while the person who became known as a fence or receiver might find themselves the target of police attention and criminal violence alike. The seasonal nature of much London employment created predictable cycles of prosperity and hardship that required careful planning to survive. The winter months were particularly difficult, as construction work slowed or stopped entirely. Shipping was reduced by harsh weather, and many outdoor occupations became impossible. Understanding these patterns and preparing for them saving money during good times, developing multiple income sources, building networks of mutual support was essential for avoiding destitution during the worst months. The Christmas season created its own particular opportunities and challenges. The increased demand for luxury goods, entertainment, and services meant more work for some, but also higher prices for food and fuel that strained already tight budgets. Understanding how to take advantage of seasonal employment opportunities, whether selling holly and mistletoe, working extra hours in shops and markets, or providing services for holiday celebrations, could provide the extra income needed to survive the lean months that followed. Summer brought different challenges, as the combination of heat, overcrowding, and primitive sanitation made disease more likely to spread rapidly through the poorer districts. Understanding when to leave the city for healthier locations if possible, how to maintain cleanliness and health during hot weather, which neighborhoods were most dangerous during heat waves. These skills could be literally life-saving during the worst summer months. The importance of maintaining respectability while living close to the edge of poverty created constant tension in daily life. The clothes that marked you as a respectable member of the working class required money you might need for food. The address that would help you find decent employment might cost more than you could afford. The social connections that could lead to better opportunities required time and resources that survival demanded be spent elsewhere. Understanding how to maintain the appearance of respectability on a minimal budget required creativity and careful attention to detail. Learning which elements of dress and behavior were most important for creating the right impression, which shortcuts were acceptable, and which would be immediately noticed. How to present yourself confidently, even when your circumstances were desperate. These skills could determine whether you were treated as a legitimate member of society or dismissed as one of the undeserving poor. The role of religion in Victorian London life created both opportunities and obligations that affected survival strategies. Church membership provided access to social networks, charitable assistance during crises, and the kind of character references that employers valued. But it also required time for services and meetings, money for contributions and proper dress, and commitment to moral standards that might conflict with other survival strategies. Understanding the different denominations and their particular characteristics was important for making the best choices about religious affiliation. The established Church of England offered respectability and connections to the middle and upper classes, but might be less welcoming to the very poor or to those whose circumstances forced them into morally ambiguous situations. Nonconformist churches often provided stronger communities of mutual support and were more accepting of working-class members, but membership might limit employment opportunities in some areas where Anglican connections were preferred. Catholic churches served the large Irish immigrant population and offered strong community support systems, but anti-Catholic prejudice was common in many parts of London society. Jewish communities provided excellent mutual aid networks for their members, but were small and faced their own forms of discrimination. Understanding these religious and ethnic divisions and navigating them appropriately was crucial for accessing the benefits of community membership while avoiding the penalties of prejudice. The city's educational institutions created opportunities for advancement that were increasingly available to working-class Londoners, though taking advantage of them required careful planning and sacrifice. Evening schools, mechanics institutes, and working men's colleges offered instruction in everything from basic literacy to advanced technical subjects. Understanding which programs offered genuine advancement opportunities, which were worth the time and expense they required, how to balance education with the immediate demands of survival. These decisions could determine whether the next generation would rise above their current circumstances. For adults, self-education through reading was often the most practical option, though even this required resources and skills that were not universally available. Learning to read well enough to benefit from newspapers, instruction manuals, and improving books required time and often formal instruction that cost money. But the investment could pay dividends in terms of better employment opportunities, greater understanding of legal and political rights, and the ability to help children with their own education. The lending libraries and reading rooms that were beginning to appear in various parts of London offered access to books and periodicals that would otherwise be far too expensive for working-class budgets. Understanding the locations, rules, and collections of these institutions could provide access to knowledge and entertainment that made the hardships of daily life more bearable, while potentially providing practical information for improving one's circumstances. Transportation within the city required both careful budgeting and strategic thinking about routes and timing. Omnibuses offered relatively inexpensive transportation for longer distances, but the fares could add up quickly for someone who needed to travel daily for work. Understanding which routes were most reliable, which offered the best value for money, how to time journeys to avoid the worst crowds and delays. These skills could save both money and time that were precious resources for working people. Walking remained the primary means of transportation for most Londoners, which meant that understanding the city's geography intimately was essential for efficient movement. Knowing the shortcuts between major destinations, understanding which streets were safe at different times of day, recognizing the landmarks that could guide you during fog or darkness. This local knowledge accumulated slowly, but proved invaluable for anyone who spent their days moving through the city. The Thames itself provided transportation opportunities for those who understood how to use the river system. The steamboat services that connected various parts of London offered alternatives to overland travel that could be both faster and more pleasant than struggling through crowded streets. Understanding the schedules, fares, and destinations of these services could provide access to employment opportunities in different parts of the city, or simply offer more efficient ways to accomplish daily tasks. Banking and financial services were becoming more accessible to working-class Londoners, though understanding how to use them effectively required overcoming both practical and psychological barriers. The Post Office Savings Bank, established in 1861, offered small savers a secure place to deposit their money while earning modest interest. But many working people remained suspicious of such institutions, preferring to keep their money in more immediately accessible forms, even when this meant greater risk of loss or theft. Understanding the difference between legitimate financial institutions and the various schemes that preyed on the financial desperation of the poor was crucial for protecting whatever resources you managed to accumulate. Friendly societies, burial clubs, and legitimate savings institutions offered genuine services and reasonable security, while loan sharks, dishonest pawnbrokers, and get-rich-quick schemes offered only the illusion of help at costs that could destroy any hope of financial stability. The credit systems that operated in working-class neighborhoods created both opportunities and traps that required careful navigation. Understanding which local shopkeepers could be trusted to provide goods on credit during hard times, what terms were reasonable for such arrangements, how to maintain good relationships with creditors, even when payments became difficult. These skills could provide crucial flexibility during periods of unemployment or illness. But debt could also become a trap that made escape from poverty increasingly difficult. Understanding when debt was a useful tool for smoothing over temporary difficulties, and when it was becoming a permanent burden that would ultimately worsen your situation, required constant attention to your overall financial position and realistic assessment of your prospects for improvement. The various forms of entertainment available in Victorian London provided not just relief from the hardships of daily life, but opportunities for social advancement and even additional income. Understanding which venues were appropriate for your social position, which offered genuine entertainment value for their cost, which might provide networking opportunities or chances to display talents that could lead to better employment. These considerations could make entertainment choices part of an overall survival strategy rather than simple luxury. Music halls, public houses with entertainment, street performances, and the various exhibitions and spectacles that constantly appeared throughout the city offered relatively inexpensive diversion. But they also provided opportunities to observe the behavior and speech patterns of different social classes, to make contacts outside your immediate neighborhood and occupation, and sometimes to discover talents or interests that could be developed into income sources. For those with particular abilities, musical talent, skill at storytelling, unusual knowledge or experiences, the entertainment industry offered potential paths to better circumstances. Street performing, while often looked down upon by respectable society, could provide income for those with genuine talent and understanding of their audiences. The music halls were always seeking new acts, and success there could lead to steady employment and social advancement that would have been impossible through conventional working-class occupations. Understanding the complex social dynamics that governed relationships between different classes, ethnic groups, and neighborhoods was essential for anyone who hoped to improve their circumstances through marriage, friendship, or business relationships. The rigid hierarchies of Victorian society created barriers that were difficult to cross, but they also created opportunities for those who understood how to present themselves appropriately in different contexts. Learning to modify your speech, dress, and behavior to match the expectations of different social situations could open doors that would otherwise remain closed. This didn't necessarily mean abandoning your origins or betraying your community, but rather developing the flexibility to function effectively in multiple social environments. The person who could speak respectably to potential employers while maintaining credibility with working-class neighbors had advantages that could be crucial for advancement. Marriage and family relationships took on particular importance in an environment where individual survival was so precarious. Understanding how to choose partners who would enhance rather than burden your survival prospects, how to maintain family relationships that provided mutual support during crises, how to balance loyalty to relatives with the practical demands of your own advancement. These decisions could determine not just your own fate, but that of any children you might have. The high mortality rates of Victorian London meant that death was a constant presence that required both practical and emotional preparation. Understanding how to prepare for your own death, ensuring that debts were manageable, that arrangements were made for dependents, that burial expenses were provided for, was as important as planning for life. Similarly, understanding how to cope with the deaths of family members, friends, and neighbors, both emotionally and practically, was an essential urban survival skill. The various charitable institutions and philanthropic organizations that operated throughout London provided resources that could be crucial during crises, but accessing them effectively required understanding their particular requirements and procedures. Some organizations focused on providing immediate relief food, clothing, temporary shelter, while others offered longer-term assistance with training, employment, or emigration to other countries where opportunities might be better. Understanding which organizations were genuinely helpful and which were more interested in moral instruction than practical assistance could save valuable time and energy during desperate situations. Some charitable institutions required proof of moral worthiness that might exclude those who most needed help, while others provided aid with fewer questions, but also with less reliable availability. The immigration opportunities that various organizations promoted could offer genuine chances for better lives, but they also carried enormous risks that needed to be carefully evaluated. Immigration to Australia, Canada, or other parts of the empire was actively encouraged by both government and private organizations, often with assisted passages for those who qualified. But understanding what life would really be like in these destinations, what skills and resources would be needed for success there, what support systems would or would not be available. This information was often difficult to obtain and sometimes deliberately obscured by those promoting immigration. As the decades passed and you learned to navigate the complexities of Victorian London life, you would develop an increasingly sophisticated understanding of the city's rhythms, opportunities, and dangers. The skills that seemed so mysterious and difficult when you first arrived would become second nature, while new challenges would emerge as your circumstances changed and the city itself evolved around you. The London of 1875 was not the same as the London of 1860, and it would be different again by 1890. New technologies, changing social attitudes, economic developments, and political reforms would continuously alter the landscape of survival and opportunity. The person who thrived in this environment would be one who remained alert to these changes and flexible enough to adapt their strategies accordingly. Understanding that survival in Victorian London was not just about enduring hardship, but about positioning yourself to take advantage of the genuine opportunities that the great city offered would separate those who merely persisted from those who ultimately prospered. The city's size and complexity that made it so dangerous and difficult also made it a place where determined individuals with the right knowledge and skills could sometimes achieve remarkable transformations in their circumstances. The networks of mutual aid, the informal systems of education and advancement, the opportunities for those willing to work hard and learn continuously. These positive aspects of Victorian London life were as real as the poverty, disease, and exploitation that have dominated many historical accounts. Survival required understanding and navigating both the dangers and the opportunities, developing the practical skills necessary for daily life, while maintaining the hope and ambition necessary for long-term improvement. The lessons learned from surviving in Victorian London would serve you well regardless of how your circumstances ultimately developed. The resourcefulness, adaptability, and social understanding required for urban survival in this era would remain valuable whether you eventually achieved prosperity, emigrated to better opportunities elsewhere, or simply managed to maintain dignity and security within the working class. The experience of having navigated one of history's most complex and challenging urban environments would provide confidence and capability that could be applied to whatever future circumstances might arise. In the end, survival in Victorian London was about more than simply staying alive, though that was certainly the first and most important requirement. It was about maintaining your humanity and dignity. In circumstances that could easily strip away both, about preserving hope and ambition when daily life seemed designed to crush them, and about building the networks of mutual support that made individual survival possible while contributing to the survival of your community. The city's endless capacity for both crushing dreams and creating new ones meant that your attitude towards setbacks and opportunities would be as important as any practical skill you might develop. The person who saw temporary unemployment as a disaster might despair and make poor decisions, while the person who saw it as a chance to explore new possibilities might discover better opportunities than they had previously imagined. This kind of mental resilience, the ability to maintain perspective during both good times and bad, was perhaps the most crucial survival skill of all. Learning to find moments of beauty and joy even in the midst of struggle would be essential for maintaining the emotional strength needed for long-term survival. The sight of the Thames at sunset, despite its pollution and smell, could still inspire awe. The sound of street musicians, even in the poorest neighborhoods, could provide a few minutes of transcendence. The kindness of neighbors who shared what little they had during hard times could restore faith in human nature when it seemed all but lost. These moments of grace were not luxuries but necessities, providing the spiritual sustenance that made physical survival meaningful. Understanding how to recognize and appreciate them, how to create opportunities for them in your own life and the lives of others, how to hold onto their memory during the darkest times, these abilities would determine whether you merely endured your circumstances or found ways to transcend them. The relationships you formed with others in similar circumstances would often prove more valuable than any material resources you might accumulate. The neighbor who could be trusted to watch your possessions while you sought work, the friend who would share information about employment opportunities, the family member who would provide a place to stay during illness or unemployment. These connections formed the real safety net that made individual survival possible in an era before social welfare systems. Building and maintaining these relationships required its own set of skills and strategies. Understanding how to be helpful to others even when your own resources were limited. How to ask for assistance without appearing desperate or demanding. How to maintain dignity and self-respect while accepting help from others. These social skills were as important as any technical abilities you might possess. The art of conversation itself became a survival tool, as the ability to present yourself well in social situations could open doors that remained closed to those who were awkward or inappropriate in their interactions with others. Learning to listen effectively, to show genuine interest in other people's experiences and opinions, to contribute something of value to group discussions. These skills could make you welcome in social circles that provided both companionship and practical opportunities. But conversation was more than just a means to an end. It was also one of the few forms of entertainment that was freely available to everyone regardless of their economic circumstances. The ability to tell stories, share news, discuss ideas, and engage in the kind of witty banter that made long working hours pass more quickly. These talents enriched your own life while making you a valued companion to others. The development of hobbies and interests that could be pursued inexpensively provided another form of mental survival that complemented the strategies for physical survival. Reading whatever books and newspapers you could access, learning about topics that interested you, developing skills in areas like drawing or music that required more talent than money. These pursuits provided mental stimulation and personal growth that made the hardships of daily life more bearable. Some of these interests might eventually develop into income opportunities, as specialized knowledge or unusual skills sometimes proved valuable in unexpected ways. The person who became expert in identifying valuable items might become successful in the second-hand goods trade. The individual who developed skill at calculating and organizing might find opportunities in small businesses that needed such abilities. The worker who learned to repair things that others threw away might discover a profitable sideline that eventually became a full-time occupation. The practice of keeping track of your experiences, whether through formal writing or simply through careful mental record keeping, would prove valuable both for practical purposes and for maintaining perspective on your situation. Understanding what strategies had worked well in the past, what mistakes you wanted to avoid repeating, what resources and contacts had proved most valuable during different kinds of crises. This self-knowledge would improve your decision-making in future situations. But record-keeping also served the important function of helping you recognize progress that might otherwise be invisible. The gradual improvement in your clothing, the slow expansion of your social circle, the increased confidence you felt in navigating different parts of the city. These developments might seem insignificant day by day, but tracking them over time could provide evidence that your survival strategies were actually working to improve your circumstances. The ability to adapt your survival strategies to changing personal circumstances would be tested repeatedly as you aged and your situation evolved. The approaches that worked for a young, healthy individual seeking to establish themselves in the city would need modification as physical strength declined, family responsibilities increased, or economic conditions changed. Understanding how to modify your strategies while maintaining their essential effectiveness required both flexibility and wisdom that could only be gained through experience. The seasonal cycles that affected employment and living costs also created opportunities for those who understood how to plan for them. The person who saved money during the busy summer months could not only survive the winter unemployment, but might also be in a position to take advantage of opportunities that emerged when others were struggling. Similarly, understanding which seasonal jobs paid best and how to position yourself for them could provide the extra income needed to improve your overall situation. The city's constant growth and development created new neighborhoods, new industries, and new opportunities for those who were alert to them and prepared to act quickly when they appeared. The person who noticed that a new railway line was being planned might position themselves to take advantage of the employment and business opportunities that would follow its construction. The individual who recognized that a particular neighborhood was beginning to attract more prosperous residents might invest time in learning skills that would be valued by such customers. But understanding change also meant recognizing when familiar strategies were becoming less effective and needed to be abandoned or modified. The trade that had provided steady employment might be displaced by new technology. The neighborhood that had been safe and affordable might become either too expensive or too dangerous. The business relationships that had been mutually beneficial might no longer serve your interests as circumstances evolved. The importance of maintaining good health became more apparent as the years passed, and the cumulative effects of poor nutrition, unhealthy living conditions, and physical stress began to take their toll. Understanding how to prevent illness through the limited means available, how to care for yourself during sickness to avoid minor problems becoming major ones, how to maintain your physical capacity for work despite the inevitable effects of aging. These considerations became increasingly important for long-term survival. The folk wisdom that accumulated in working-class communities often contained genuine insights about health maintenance that complemented or sometimes contradicted official medical advice. Learning which traditional remedies were genuinely helpful, which were harmless but useless, and which might be dangerous required careful observation and discrimination. The neighbor who seemed to stay healthy despite difficult circumstances might have knowledge worth learning, while the person who was constantly ill despite following popular remedies might serve as a warning about ineffective practices. The mental and emotional aspects of health required attention as well, as the constant stress of economic insecurity and social marginalization could lead to despair, alcoholism, or other problems that made survival even more difficult. Understanding how to maintain hope and purpose despite repeated setbacks, how to find healthy ways to cope with stress and frustration, how to maintain social connections that provided emotional support. These skills were as important as any physical health practices. The role of alcohol in Victorian working-class culture created both opportunities and dangers that required careful navigation. The pub served essential social functions as a community center, news exchange, and source of mutual support, while alcohol itself provided one of the few affordable pleasures available to people whose lives were otherwise dominated by work and worry. But excessive drinking could quickly destroy the health, employment prospects, and family relationships that were essential for survival. Understanding how to participate in the social aspects of drinking culture without falling victim to alcoholism required self-knowledge and discipline that were not always easy to maintain under stress. Learning to recognize the warning signs in yourself and others, understanding when social drinking was becoming self-medication for problems that needed other solutions, knowing how to maintain social connections while limiting alcohol consumption. These skills could determine whether the pub remained a resource or became a trap. The various religious and philosophical movements that emerged during this period offered different approaches to finding meaning and community in difficult circumstances. Understanding what each had to offer, what they required in return, and how participation in them might affect your other survival strategies was important for making informed decisions about involvement. Some movements offered primarily spiritual comfort and community support, while others included practical assistance with employment, housing, or education. Some required significant time and financial commitments, while others were more flexible about the level of participation expected. Some were compatible with existing social and family relationships, while others might require changes that could affect your broader survival network. The political developments of the era created new opportunities for working-class people to influence the conditions that affected their daily survival. Understanding how to participate effectively in these political movements, what they might realistically accomplish, how involvement might affect your other activities. These considerations became increasingly important as the franchise expanded and labor organizations became more powerful. But political involvement also carried risks, as employers, landlords, and government authorities might view certain types of political activity as threatening or subversive. Learning how to advocate for your interests and those of your community, while avoiding unnecessary conflict with those who controlled resources, you needed required diplomatic skills that complemented the more direct survival strategies. The educational opportunities that gradually became available to working-class adults and children represented perhaps the most significant long-term strategy for improving survival prospects. Understanding how to take advantage of these opportunities despite the immediate pressures of daily survival, how to balance the time and resources required for education with the need for immediate income, how to apply educational gains to practical improvement of circumstances. These decisions could affect not just your own future, but that of your children and grandchildren. The development of technical skills that were in demand by the city's growing industries could provide pathways to better employment and greater security. Understanding which skills were likely to remain valuable as technology changed, how to acquire training in these areas, how to demonstrate competency to potential employers. These strategies required long-term thinking that could be difficult to maintain when immediate survival was in question. But even basic literacy and numeracy could provide significant advantages in daily life, from understanding legal documents and employment contracts to managing personal finances more effectively. The ability to read newspapers and other sources of information could help you stay informed about opportunities and dangers that might affect your situation. The capacity to write letters could help you maintain relationships and seek assistance from people who are not immediately accessible. The networks of mutual aid that developed within various communities based on trade, neighborhood, ethnicity, or shared interests provided models for survival that went beyond individual strategies. Understanding how these networks functioned, how to contribute to them effectively, how to access their resources when needed without becoming overly dependent. These skills connected individual survival to community survival in ways that strengthened both. These networks also preserved and transmitted knowledge about survival strategies, passing information from experienced city dwellers to newcomers, from older workers to younger ones, from successful individuals to those still struggling. Participating in this knowledge-sharing process, both as a recipient and eventually as a contributor, created relationships and obligations that enriched survival strategies with social meaning and purpose. The various crises that periodically affected the city: economic downturns, disease outbreaks, severe weather, political upheavals tested the effectiveness of both individual and community survival strategies. Understanding how to prepare for such crises, how to adapt quickly when they occurred, how to help others while protecting your own interests, how to take advantage of the opportunities that often emerged in the aftermath of disasters. These skills separated those who merely endured crises from those who used them as stepping stones to better circumstances. The recovery periods that followed major crises often provided opportunities for advancement that might not have existed under normal circumstances. Labor shortages created by disease or emigration might open employment opportunities that had previously been closed to certain groups. Economic disruption might create new needs for goods and services that enterprising individuals could meet. Social upheaval might temporarily relax some of the barriers that normally separated different classes and communities. Understanding how to recognize and act upon these opportunities while they existed, how to position yourself to take advantage of them, how to consolidate gains made during crisis periods so they would survive the return to normal conditions. These abilities could transform temporary advantages into permanent improvements in circumstances. The importance of maintaining flexibility in your survival strategies became more apparent as you gained experience with the city's unpredictable nature. The approach that worked perfectly in one situation might fail completely in circumstances that seemed only slightly different. The resource that was available and reliable for years might suddenly become unavailable due to changes you had no control over. The skill that provided steady employment might become obsolete due to technological or economic developments. Developing multiple survival strategies simultaneously, maintaining diverse income sources, cultivating various types of relationships and resources. These approaches provided security through redundancy rather than through any single strong position. The person who depended entirely on one job, one skill, one relationship, or one neighborhood was vulnerable to changes that the person with multiple options could weather more easily. But maintaining this kind of flexibility required energy and attention that were themselves limited resources. Understanding how to balance the security that came from diversification with the efficiency that came from specialization was a constant challenge that required ongoing adjustment as circumstances changed. The psychological aspects of survival became more apparent with experience, as the mental habits and emotional patterns that supported successful navigation of urban challenges became clearer. The ability to maintain optimism without unrealistic expectations, to be cautious without becoming paralyzed by fear, to be generous to others without sacrificing your own essential needs. These mental skills required as much development and practice as any physical abilities. The stories you told yourself about your situation, your prospects, and your worth as a person had profound effects on your survival strategies and their effectiveness. Understanding how to maintain narratives that supported effort and hope while remaining realistic about challenges and limitations could determine whether you persevered through difficult periods or gave up when persistence might have led to breakthrough. The comparison with others in similar circumstances could either motivate improvement or foster despair, depending on how you interpreted the differences in outcomes. Learning to draw useful lessons from others' experiences without becoming envious of their successes or despairing about their failures required perspective that could be difficult to maintain under stress. The development of personal standards and values that could be maintained despite external pressures was crucial for preserving dignity and self-respect during the worst times. Understanding which compromises were acceptable and which would damage your sense of self, which principles were worth defending despite their cost, and which could be temporarily set aside for practical reasons. These decisions shaped not just your survival, but your character. The legacy you would leave, whether through children, community contributions, or simply the example of how you lived your life, provided meaning that transcended immediate survival concerns. Understanding how your survival strategies affected others, how your choices contributed to or detracted from the welfare of your community, how your example might influence those who came after you, These considerations connected individual survival to larger purposes that made hardship more bearable and success more meaningful. The city itself was constantly changing around you, and your survival strategies needed to evolve with it. The London of your later years would offer different opportunities and present different challenges than the city you first encountered. The skills that served you well in your youth might need modification or replacement as you aged, and the urban environment transformed. The relationships that sustained you during your early struggles might change as you and others experienced different fortunes. But the fundamental abilities that successful urban survival required: adaptability, resourcefulness, social intelligence, physical resilience, mental fortitude, and moral flexibility balanced with essential principles. These would remain valuable throughout your life and could be applied to whatever circumstances you encountered. The confidence that came from having successfully navigated the challenges of Victorian London would serve you well regardless of how your situation ultimately developed. The knowledge that you had survived and even thrived in one of history's most complex and demanding urban environments would provide a foundation of self-respect and capability that no external circumstances could entirely destroy. Whatever successes or failures might follow, you would know that you had met the test of the great city and proven yourself capable of more than you might have imagined when you first stepped off that omnibus onto the cobblestones of Victorian London, ready to begin the greatest adventure and challenge of your life. The accumulation of wisdom that came from years of navigating Victorian London's complexities would eventually transform you from someone who merely survived the city's challenges into someone who understood them deeply enough to help others facing similar struggles. This transition from survival to mastery represented one of the most significant transformations possible within the constraints of working-class life, as it meant you had not only overcome the immediate threats to your existence, but had developed sufficient security and knowledge to extend assistance to those still struggling with problems you had learned to solve. The mentorship role that naturally emerged from this accumulated expertise provided both personal satisfaction and practical benefits, as helping others navigate the city's dangers and opportunities created networks of mutual obligation that could prove valuable during your own future crises. The young person you taught to read might eventually achieve a position where they could provide employment or other assistance. The family you helped through a medical emergency might remember your kindness when they were in a position to offer help in return. The neighbor you advised about dealing with difficult landlords might become a trusted ally in future housing negotiations. But this mentorship role also required careful balance between generosity and self-protection, as unlimited altruism could quickly exhaust resources that remained essential for your own security. Understanding how to help others without compromising your own position, how to share knowledge and assistance in ways that strengthened rather than weakened your community, how to encourage independence rather than dependence in those you aided. These skills represented the highest level of urban survival expertise. The seasonal rhythms that had once seemed so threatening would eventually become predictable patterns that you could anticipate and prepare for with increasing sophistication. The winter unemployment that had once brought panic would become an expected interval that you prepared for by saving money during busy periods, developing alternative income sources, or using the time for activities like equipment maintenance or skill development that were difficult to pursue during peak working seasons. Understanding how to use these predictable cycles to your advantage, rather than simply enduring them, separated the truly skilled urban survivor from those who remained perpetually reactive to circumstances beyond their control. The person who used summer prosperity to prepare for winter challenges, who planned major purchases or relocations to coincide with favorable seasons, who developed the discipline to save during abundance for security during scarcity. This individual had achieved a level of mastery that provided both material security and psychological peace of mind. The development of specialized knowledge about particular aspects of city life could provide advantages that went far beyond personal survival, creating opportunities for income and influence that might not have been available through conventional employment. The person who became expert in navigating the city's bureaucratic systems might find opportunities helping others deal with legal problems, government applications, or business registrations. This specialized knowledge might develop almost accidentally as you gained experience with particular challenges or opportunities that your circumstances had forced you to master. The tenant who had learned to deal effectively with difficult landlords might discover that others would pay for advice about similar problems. The worker who had figured out how to manage relationships with multiple employers might find opportunities helping others develop more flexible employment arrangements. The art of negotiation, refined through countless interactions with employers, landlords, vendors, and officials, would become one of your most valuable skills, applicable to virtually every aspect of urban life. Understanding how to present your position persuasively while remaining respectful, how to identify the interests and motivations of those you were dealing with, how to find compromises that served everyone's essential needs while protecting your own bottom line. These abilities could improve every transaction and relationship in your daily life. But effective negotiation in Victorian London also required understanding the complex social codes that governed interactions between different classes, genders, and ethnic groups. The approach that worked well when dealing with a middle-class employer might be completely inappropriate when negotiating with a working-class landlord. The deference expected in some situations might be interpreted as weakness in others. The directness that was appreciated by some would be considered insulting by those who expected more elaborate courtesy. Learning to read these social signals quickly and accurately, to modify your approach based on the specific person and situation you were dealing with, to maintain your essential dignity while adapting your presentation to maximize effectiveness. These skills required both intelligence and experience that could only be developed through extensive practice in diverse situations. The financial sophistication that gradually developed from managing limited resources under constant pressure would eventually provide capabilities that many people with greater incomes never developed. Understanding how to evaluate the true costs of different options, how to balance immediate needs against long-term goals, how to recognize and avoid the various schemes that preyed on financial desperation. These skills were valuable regardless of your income level. The discipline required to save money from inadequate wages, to resist immediate gratification when resources were scarce, to make difficult choices between competing needs. This financial self-control would serve you well if your circumstances eventually improved, while providing essential security during the lean years. The person who learned to live within their means when those means were minimal would be well prepared to handle prosperity if it came, while remaining secure even if it didn't. Understanding the difference between true assets and mere possessions would become crucial for long-term financial stability. The tool that enabled you to earn money was more valuable than the luxury item that merely provided comfort. The clothing that helped you present yourself appropriately for employment opportunities was more important than fashionable items that served only vanity. The books or training that improved your capabilities were better investments than entertainment that provided only temporary pleasure. This kind of strategic thinking about possessions and investments required constantly evaluating your circumstances and priorities, making decisions based on their long-term impact on your survival and advancement, rather than their immediate appeal. The person who developed this discipline would gradually accumulate resources and capabilities that provided increasing security and opportunity, while those who never learned to think strategically about their limited resources would remain perpetually vulnerable to circumstances beyond their control. The health knowledge accumulated through years of managing medical problems with limited resources would often prove more practical and effective than the formal medical care available to wealthier individuals. Understanding which symptoms required immediate attention and which could be safely monitored, which home remedies were genuinely helpful and which were merely traditional, how to maintain health through nutrition and lifestyle choices rather than expensive treatments. This knowledge was valuable not just for your own well-being, but for that of your family and community. The experience of caring for others during illness, whether family members, neighbors, or fellow lodgers, would teach you skills that were in constant demand in an era when professional medical care was expensive and often dangerous. The ability to provide competent nursing care, to prepare appropriate foods for invalids, to recognize when professional help was truly necessary. These capabilities could provide both income opportunities and the satisfaction of helping others during their most vulnerable moments. But the most important health insight that emerged from years of urban survival was understanding the connection between economic security and physical well-being. The person who achieved sufficient income to afford adequate food, decent housing, and appropriate clothing would be far less likely to succumb to the diseases that ravaged the poorest residents. The individual who could afford to rest during illness, rather than working through, it would recover more quickly and completely. This understanding would motivate continued efforts to improve your economic position, not just for comfort or status, but as a literal matter of life and death. The extra shilling per week that allowed better nutrition, the improved lodging that provided healthier living conditions, the clothing that offered better protection against weather and infection. These investments in your survival were often more important than medical treatment after problems had already developed. The social networks that had begun as survival necessities would gradually evolve into genuine communities that provided meaning and identity beyond their practical functions. The relationships formed through shared hardship often proved stronger and more reliable than those based merely on convenience or temporary mutual interest. The neighbors who had helped each other through crises would remain connected even as circumstances changed and individual fortunes varied. Understanding how to nurture these relationships during good times so they would remain available during bad times became increasingly important as you recognized their value. This might mean continuing to participate in community activities, even when you no longer desperately needed the assistance they provided, contributing to mutual aid efforts even when your own situation was secure, maintaining social connections even as improved circumstances might allow you to move to different neighborhoods or associate with different social groups. The loyalty and mutual support that characterized the best of working-class community life provided models for human relationships that were often superior to those found in more prosperous circumstances. The willingness to share scarce resources with those in greater need, to provide assistance without expectation of specific returns, to maintain solidarity in the face of external threats. These values created communities that were resilient and supportive in ways that mere economic prosperity could not match. But community solidarity also required balance with individual advancement, as unlimited sacrifice for others could prevent the accumulation of resources and capabilities that would ultimately benefit everyone. Understanding when community loyalty should take precedence over personal opportunity, and when individual advancement could serve community interests was a constant challenge that required both wisdom and courage. The political awareness that developed from experiencing the effects of government policies on daily survival would gradually evolve into understanding of how those policies might be influenced and changed. The person who had struggled with inadequate sanitation would understand the importance of municipal public health measures. The individual who had faced unemployment during economic downturns would appreciate the need for policies that provided some security against market fluctuations. This political engagement might begin with local issues that directly affected your neighborhood or trade, but could gradually expand to broader questions of social and economic policy. Understanding how to participate effectively in political movements, how to advocate for specific changes while building broader coalitions, how to balance immediate needs with long-term goals. These skills could provide influence that went far beyond your individual circumstances. But political activity in Victorian Britain also carried risks that needed to be carefully evaluated, as employers and authorities might view certain types of advocacy as threatening or subversive. Learning how to advance political goals while protecting your economic security, how to support causes you believed in without jeopardizing relationships you depended upon, how to navigate the complex relationships between class identity and political loyalty. These challenges required both principle and pragmatism. The success of various political movements during this period in improving conditions for working-class people demonstrated that individual survival strategies, while essential, were not sufficient to address the structural problems that made survival so difficult. Understanding how to connect personal experience with political action, how to use your survival expertise to inform advocacy for others facing similar challenges, how to balance immediate self-interest with broader social reform. These connections could give deeper meaning to the struggles you had endured and overcome. The technological changes that continuously transformed Victorian London created both new challenges and new opportunities that required constant adaptation of survival strategies. The expansion of railway networks changed employment patterns and housing costs in various parts of the city. The introduction of gas lighting improved safety in some areas while creating new forms of employment and business opportunities. The development of new manufacturing processes created demand for different skills while making others obsolete. Understanding how to anticipate and adapt to these changes, rather than simply reacting to them after they had already disrupted your established routines, could provide significant advantages. The person who recognized that a new railway line would increase demand for services in previously remote areas might position themselves to take advantage of those opportunities. The individual who understood that new technology would eliminate certain jobs might begin developing alternative skills before unemployment became crisis. This technological awareness required not just observation of immediate changes, but understanding of broader trends that might affect your situation in the future. The ability to read newspapers and other sources of information about economic and technological developments, to understand their likely implications for your particular circumstances, to make strategic decisions based on predicted rather than current conditions. These capabilities separated those who shaped their own futures from those who remained subject to forces beyond their control. The gradual improvement in your circumstances that could result from successful application of these various survival strategies would bring new challenges and opportunities that required different approaches than those that had served during the most difficult periods. The transition from desperation to security, from reaction to planning, from individual struggle to community contribution. These changes required psychological and social adjustments that could be as difficult as the original challenges of urban survival. Understanding how to handle prosperity if it came, without losing the skills and relationships that had made it possible, was crucial for maintaining long-term security. The person who abandoned old friends and communities when circumstances improved might find themselves isolated and vulnerable if their improved situation proved temporary. The individual who forgot the lessons learned during difficult times might repeat expensive mistakes if faced with new challenges. But the most important insight that emerged from successful navigation of Victorian London's challenges was understanding that survival was not just about individual endurance, but about maintaining humanity and creating meaning in circumstances that could easily destroy both. The person who emerged from years of urban struggle with their principles intact, their compassion for others enhanced rather than diminished, their understanding of human nature deepened rather than cynical, this individual had achieved something more valuable than mere material success. The stories you would tell about your experiences, the wisdom you would pass on to others facing similar challenges, the example you would provide of what was possible even in the most difficult circumstances. These contributions to your community would outlast any material achievements and provide the kind of immortality that was available even to those who would never be remembered in history books or official records. The confidence that came from knowing you had faced the ultimate test of urban survival and succeeded would remain with you regardless of whatever future challenges you might encounter. The adaptability, resourcefulness, and resilience you had developed would serve you well in any circumstances, while the relationships and communities you had helped build would provide ongoing support and meaning throughout your life. The understanding that individual survival was connected to community survival, that personal advancement was enhanced by helping others succeed, that the skills learned through hardship could be used to prevent others from facing similar difficulties. These insights connected your personal struggle to larger purposes that gave meaning to whatever sacrifices and compromises had been necessary along the way. The transformation from someone who arrived in Victorian London as a vulnerable newcomer to someone who understood the city deeply enough to help others navigate its challenges represented one of the most significant personal achievements possible within the constraints of working-class life. The knowledge that you had not merely endured, but mastered one of history's most complex and demanding urban environments would provide a foundation of self-respect and capability that no external circumstances could diminish. The city that had once seemed overwhelming and threatening had become familiar territory where you moved with confidence and competence. The systems that had once seemed mysterious and hostile had become tools you could use effectively for your own purposes and to help others achieve theirs. The relationships that had begun as desperate attempts to find assistance had evolved into genuine communities that provided both practical support and personal meaning. The Victorian London that had tested every aspect of your character, intelligence, and determination had ultimately provided the stage for discovering capabilities you might never have known you possessed. The survival skills you had developed, the wisdom you had gained, the relationships you had built, the community you had helped create these achievements represented a kind of success that was independent of conventional measures of prosperity or social advancement. Whether your material circumstances ultimately improved dramatically or remained modest, whether you gained recognition and influence, or remained one of the anonymous millions who made the great city function, whether you left descendants who would remember your struggles, or passed from the world leaving only the example of how you lived, the knowledge that you had met the challenge of surviving in Victorian London and emerged with your humanity intact would remain the most important victory of your life. Proof that the human spirit could triumph over even the most difficult circumstances through intelligence, determination, and mutual support. The wisdom that accumulated through decades of urban survival would eventually reveal patterns and principles that went far beyond the specific circumstances of Victorian London, creating a philosophy of life that could be applied to any challenging situation. The understanding that every crisis contained opportunities for those prepared to recognize them, that every setback provided lessons that could prevent future problems, that every relationship carried the potential for mutual benefit if approached with the right combination of generosity and prudence. These insights transcended their original context and became guides for living that retained their value regardless of external circumstances. The development of what might be called urban intuition, the ability to sense danger or opportunity from subtle environmental cues, to read the character and intentions of strangers quickly and accurately, to navigate complex social situations without detailed advanced planning, represented a form of intelligence that formal education rarely provided, but that proved invaluable in countless daily situations. This intuitive understanding of human nature and urban dynamics would serve you well whether you remained in London's working-class neighborhoods or eventually moved to different social or geographical environments. The recognition that genuine security came not from any single source of income, relationship, or resource, but from the ability to create multiple options and maintain flexibility in the face of changing circumstances, would influence every major decision for the rest of your life. The person who had learned to survive by keeping several possibilities always available would approach marriage, employment, housing, and investment decisions with a strategic awareness that provided protection against the inevitable uncertainties of life. This understanding of security through diversification extended beyond material concerns to encompass emotional and social resilience as well. The relationships that sustained you through difficult times taught the importance of maintaining multiple sources of emotional support rather than depending entirely on any single person or group. The communities that provided practical assistance demonstrated the value of contributing to networks of mutual aid, even when your immediate needs were met, ensuring that support would be available during future crises. The accumulated experience of making difficult choices under pressure, deciding between competing necessities when resources were inadequate for all of them, choosing which principles could be temporarily compromised and which were essential for maintaining self-respect, balancing loyalty to family and community against opportunities for individual advancement, had developed decision-making capabilities that served well in any complex situation. Understanding how to evaluate options quickly but thoroughly, how to anticipate the likely consequences of different choices, how to make decisions with incomplete information, while remaining alert to new developments that might require changes in direction. These skills proved valuable whether applied to major life decisions or routine daily challenges. The person who had learned to make good decisions under the pressure of urban survival would approach all future choices with confidence and competence. The appreciation for simple pleasures and basic securities that developed through experiencing their absence would provide a foundation of contentment that was independent of material prosperity. The person who had known genuine hunger would never take adequate food for granted. The individual who had experienced homelessness would always appreciate having shelter. The worker who had faced unemployment would value steady work regardless of its glamour or prestige. This appreciation for fundamentals created a form of happiness that was remarkably resilient, as it was based on gratitude for things that could usually be maintained even during difficult times, rather than on achievements or possessions that might be lost through circumstances beyond one's control. The psychological security that came from knowing you could find satisfaction in basic necessities, provided protection against the disappointments and frustrations that often accompanied higher ambitions. The understanding of how quickly circumstances could change, for better or worse, that came from experiencing the unpredictable nature of urban life created both caution about overconfidence and hope during difficult periods. The person who had seen desperate situations transform into opportunities knew that current problems were rarely permanent, while someone who had also seen comfortable circumstances disappear suddenly understood the importance of preparing for difficulties even during good times. This balanced perspective on change and uncertainty provided emotional stability that enhanced both survival prospects and quality of life. The individual who neither despaired during setbacks nor became complacent during success was better prepared to make sound decisions regardless of circumstances, while also being more pleasant to live and work with than those who swung between extremes of emotion based on temporary conditions. The networks of relationships that had been built through years of mutual assistance and shared struggle would often prove more durable and reliable than those based on common prosperity or social status. The bonds formed through helping each other survive genuine crises created obligations and loyalties that persisted even as individual circumstances changed dramatically. Former neighbors who had shared resources during lean times would remember those kindnesses years later when they were in positions to offer employment, business opportunities, or other assistance. Understanding how to maintain these relationships despite geographical separation or social advancement, how to continue providing mutual support even as the nature of that support evolved with changing circumstances, how to honor old obligations while creating new opportunities. These skills connected survival expertise to long-term social and economic advancement in ways that purely individual strategies could not achieve. The reputation that developed from being known as someone who could be trusted during difficult times, who kept agreements even when circumstances made them inconvenient, who provided help to others without exploitation or self-righteousness. This social capital often proved more valuable than financial resources, opening doors and creating opportunities that money alone could not purchase. But maintaining this reputation required consistent behavior over many years, as trust once lost was extremely difficult to regain in communities where everyone's survival depended on being able to evaluate others' reliability accurately. The person who had learned the importance of trustworthiness through experiencing its absence in others would understand that their reputation was one of their most valuable assets, requiring constant attention and protection. The skills developed through years of stretching inadequate resources to meet essential needs would remain valuable even if material circumstances improved dramatically. Understanding how to evaluate purchases based on their long-term utility rather than immediate appeal, how to maintain and repair possessions to extend their useful life, how to find alternative uses for items that might otherwise be discarded. These capabilities provided both practical benefits and psychological security, regardless of income level. The creativity required to solve problems with limited resources often led to innovations that proved valuable in other contexts. The person who had learned to accomplish necessary tasks with improvised tools and unconventional methods had developed problem-solving abilities that could be applied to challenges that others might find overwhelming. This resourcefulness was particularly valuable during periods of rapid change, when established methods might no longer be effective. The physical resilience developed through years of hard work, irregular meals, and exposure to harsh conditions would provide health advantages that lasted well into old age. The person who had built strength and endurance through necessity often aged more successfully than those whose comfortable circumstances had never required physical exertion. Similarly, the immune system strengthened through exposure to urban diseases often provided better protection against later illnesses than the sheltered lives of the more prosperous. But the most important aspects of this physical resilience were the mental attitudes that accompanied it. The understanding that temporary discomfort was bearable if it served a larger purpose, that physical challenges could be overcome through determination and proper technique, that health was something to be actively maintained rather than simply assumed. These attitudes toward physical well-being often proved more valuable than any specific fitness or medical knowledge. The understanding of how systems worked, whether bureaucratic, economic, social, or political, that came from navigating them successfully despite their complexity and often hostile nature, provided capabilities that were valuable in any organizational context. The person who had learned to achieve their goals within rigid hierarchical systems, to find unofficial channels when official ones were blocked, to build coalitions among people with different interests. These skills were applicable whether dealing with government agencies, employers, or community organizations. This systems thinking extended to understanding how changes in one area might affect seemingly unrelated aspects of life. The worker who understood how economic policies affected employment opportunities, how transportation developments influenced housing costs, how political changes might alter social dynamics, this individual could anticipate and prepare for developments that caught others unprepared. The leadership capabilities that emerged from being someone others turned to for advice and assistance during crises would often create opportunities for advancement that might not have been available through conventional channels. The person who had demonstrated ability to make sound decisions under pressure, to organize resources effectively during emergencies, to maintain morale and cooperation during difficult times. These individuals were valued by employers, community organizations, and political movements seeking competent people for positions of responsibility. But effective leadership in working-class contexts required different approaches than those used in more privileged environments. Understanding how to lead by example rather than authority, how to build consensus among people with limited time and resources, how to motivate others without being able to offer significant material rewards. These skills were developed through experience rather than formal training, but proved highly effective in many situations. The entrepreneurial instincts that developed from constantly seeking new ways to generate income or solve problems would often identify business opportunities that others missed. The person who had learned to recognize unmet needs in their community, to provide services that established businesses overlooked, to create value from resources that others discarded. These capabilities could lead to successful enterprises that began small but grew through reinvestment and reputation. Understanding how to start and operate businesses with minimal capital, how to build customer loyalty through superior service rather than lower prices, how to manage growth without losing the personal relationships that made success possible. These skills were developed through necessity, but provided advantages that remained valuable even as resources became more abundant. The cultural sophistication that gradually developed through exposure to London's diverse population would provide perspectives on human nature and social organization that formal education rarely offered. Living and working alongside people from different regional, ethnic, and religious backgrounds created understanding of how cultural differences could be both sources of conflict and opportunities for mutual enrichment. This multicultural awareness would prove increasingly valuable as London continued to grow and diversify, while also providing insights into human universals that transcended specific cultural contexts. The person who had learned to work effectively with people whose backgrounds and beliefs differed significantly from their own had developed communication and cooperation skills that were applicable in any diverse environment. The historical perspective that came from living through decades of rapid change would provide unique insights into the patterns of urban development and social transformation. The person who had witnessed the construction of new neighborhoods, the rise and decline of different industries, the evolution of social attitudes and political systems. This individual would understand that current conditions were neither permanent nor inevitable, but rather stages in ongoing processes of development. This historical awareness could inform both personal and community decision-making, as understanding the direction and pace of change could help anticipate future opportunities and challenges. The person who recognized that certain trends would continue while others would reverse could make strategic choices about where to live, what skills to develop, and what investments to make. The spiritual and philosophical insights that emerged from confronting life's fundamental challenges would often prove more profound and practical than those developed in more sheltered circumstances. The person who had faced genuine questions about survival, meaning, and moral obligation under pressure had been forced to examine their deepest beliefs and values in ways that comfortable living rarely required. understanding what principles were truly essential for maintaining self-respect, what sources of meaning could survive the worst circumstances, what relationships and activities provided genuine rather than superficial satisfaction. These insights created a foundation for living that remained solid regardless of external conditions. The wisdom gained through hardship often proved more reliable than philosophical theories that had never been tested through experience. The legacy that such a life would leave in the children who had been raised with these values and capabilities, in the community members who had been helped and inspired by this example, in the institutions and traditions that had been strengthened through participation and contribution, would extend far beyond any individual achievements or recognition. The influence of someone who had successfully navigated Victorian London's challenges while maintaining their humanity would ripple through generations in ways that might never be fully recognized, but would nonetheless make a real difference in countless lives. The knowledge that you had met the ultimate test of urban survival and not merely endured, but contributed something valuable to your community, would provide the kind of satisfaction that no external recognition or material success could match. The understanding that your struggles had served purposes larger than your own survival, that your example had demonstrated what was possible even in the most difficult circumstances, that your life had proved the resilience and potential of the human spirit. This awareness would remain your most precious possession, more valuable than any material wealth you might accumulate or any social status you might achieve.